I walked into the small conference room still thinking about a project deadline. My manager Karen didn't ask me to sit. HR was already there. The whole thing took 4 minutes. They thanked me for my contributions, said the company was restructuring, and slid a folder across the table with a severance agreement. No details, no explanation, just a rehearsed tone that told me this had been decided long ago. I didn't argue, I was too stunned. My last review was glowing. I'd even trained 2 new hires the month before. As I cleaned out my desk, people avoided eye contact like I'd become invisible. By the time I reached the parking lot, I had no idea what had just happened to my life. The first week at home felt like a bad vacation I never asked for. I refreshed job boards obsessively while replaying the meeting in my head. Friends said, "It's their loss," but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something huge. When I emailed HR asking for feedback, I received a generic response about company policy. My manager stopped replying entirely. Even coworkers I considered close suddenly went quiet. That silence hurt more than the termination itself. It felt like I'd crossed into some forbidden category, someone not worth explaining things to. I began to wonder if I'd been terrible at my job and somehow blind to it. Or worse, if people had been quietly documenting things about me for years. 2 weeks later, I got a text from Nate, a coworker I'd mentored. He said, "I probably shouldn't say this, but something about your file seemed off." My heart pounded. He wouldn't explain over text, only that he'd overheard HR talking after I left. We met at a diner after work. Nate kept checking over his shoulder like someone might walk in and report him. He said HR had mentioned long-standing concerns and a pattern of behavior. I nearly laughed. I'd never been written up. I barely even used sick days. That phrase, pattern of behavior, became lodged in my mind like a splinter. What pattern, based on what? I spent the next day researching my rights and learned I could formally request my HR records. When I submitted the request, HR replied that it would take several weeks. That delay felt intentional. While I waited, memories started rearranging themselves. Comments from managers I once brushed off, meetings where I'd felt oddly dismissed, projects I'd been quietly removed from. None of it made sense at the time, but together it formed something darker. When the envelope finally arrived, it was thicker than I expected. Seeing my name printed on every page was unsettling, like reading a biography written by strangers who barely knew me. The first page was a summary written by HR. It labeled me as difficult to manage, resistant to direction, and not aligned with company culture. My hands shook. None of that had ever been said to my face. As I flipped through the pages, I found meeting notes I didn't remember happening. Comments taken out of context. One email where I'd questioned a deadline was framed as refusal to cooperate. A joke I'd made during a stressful week was documented as negative attitude. I wasn't reading a record of my career. I was reading a rewritten version of myself. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. None of these notes told the full story. There was no mention of the overtime I worked, the weekends I logged in, the praise I'd received in team meetings. One note described me as disengaged on a project I'd actually completed early. Another said I avoided collaboration during a time when my manager had told me to work independently. It was like watching someone crop my life down to its worst angles. Halfway through the file, I noticed a pattern. The negative comments all began after a single event, an internal presentation where I'd politely challenged a proposed timeline. I'd thought it was a productive conversation. Apparently, it was. From that moment on, everything I did seemed to be filtered through a new lens. Helpful suggestions were labeled as resistance. Quiet days became withdrawn behavior. I wasn't being evaluated anymore, I was being interpreted. That presentation had happened almost 2 years before I was let go. 2 years of silent documentation. Toward the back of the file was an internal email chain that made my stomach drop. My manager had written to HR asking how to build a case in case my attitude didn't improve. HR responded with guidance on documentation. That was the moment I realized my termination hadn't been about performance at all. It had been about creating a narrative. I emailed Karen asking to talk. To my surprise, she agreed. We met at a coffee shop. She looked uncomfortable, like someone who hoped I'd cancel. When I asked her about the file, she sighed and said, "You were hard to manage." That was it. No examples, no apologies, just a phrase she'd probably said 100 times. I realized then she genuinely believed the story she'd helped write about me. For months after, every job interview felt haunted by that file. I worried about what future employers might think if similar narratives followed me. I rewrote my resume obsessively, trying to sound like the person I used to believe I was. Slowly, though, something shifted. I stopped defending myself to invisible critics and started listening to the version of me that still showed up every day. I began documenting my own work in a personal journal: wins, challenges, honest reflections. It felt strange at first, but it grounded me. I wasn't letting someone else write my history anymore. A recruiter eventually asked me why I left my last role. For the first time, I answered calmly, without fear. I told the truth without bitterness. 3 months later, I started a new position at a smaller company. On my first day, my manager said, "We value transparency here." It was a simple sentence, but it hit me harder than any motivational speech ever had. I kept waiting for the same pattern to repeat. It didn't. I still have that HR file in a drawer. I don't open it often, but I keep it as proof that reality isn't always what's written down. Sometimes systems fail people quietly, not with shouting or drama, but with notes in folders no one ever sees. I learned that being good at your job doesn't always protect you, that asking questions can be misread, that silence can hide decisions already made. But I also learned something more important. I am not a file, I'm not a label, and I don't need permission to believe my own story.